You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Jeff, it is my honor to get to stand in for Dale Sellers as the host of the 95 Podcast this week and have a conversation with you. So on behalf of the team at 95 Network, welcome to the 95 Podcast, my friend. It's great to have you.
Thanks, John. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Jeff, you and I go back a few years. You and I connected at a major transition point in your ministry. You were kind of right in the middle of a major transition, and we were able to work together for a little while in a kind of a coaching capacity. But over that time, I've truly just developed a friendship with you. I admire the work that you're doing in the world, and I want to highlight some of that as we talk about your business that you have, Church Plant Solutions, and how you serve the church. But before we get into that, I really want to unpack some parts of your story because I think it'll resonate with many in the audience here, pastors that can identify with certain parts of your story. It's you didn't invent anything new that pastors go through, but you walk through some stuff. So why don't you just kind of give us an overview of what your path in ministry has looked like, and then we'll kind of go down some rabbit holes together, if that's okay.
Yeah, happy to share. Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, I think my experience, unfortunately, I think is nothing new to many pastors, but I've been in ministry, full-time ministry, for over 20 years. I spent the first 18 years as a church planter, planted 3 different churches in 3 different kind of contexts, from inner city to small town to medium town. And probably it was in the most significant part of the story, I think, is in 2019, I believe it was, or maybe 2018. About 2 years, 2 years into my 3rd church plant, I just hit a wall. I describe it best as, I'm like just cruising down the highway. Everything's great. Got the top down, the sun is shining, going 100 miles an hour down the highway, right into a brick wall, and just slam, just didn't see it coming, just hit hard, and like my life just basically stopped at that moment, where just couldn't function anymore. And so that's probably the most significant part of my story. That was 5 years ago now, which actually seems kind of, in many ways, seems like it was just yesterday.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about some of that, but before we go too deep there, let me just back up to say this. I don't want you to underestimate the level of success that you had as a church planter before jumping into this 3rd one. You had been a part of a really healthy church plant that by all metrics was really successful. And then so you move in with that kind of momentum to start something new. And again, things seem to be moving up and to the right. And then just out of nowhere, again, I just wanted to highlight that, like, it's not like you came out of this long season of just struggling and fighting for survival. Like, things were going fairly well as far as what fairly well in ministry looks like. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great thing to add, because church was good. I mean, like you said, by all accounts, things were going great. And in fact, I remember, the weird thing is, I remember telling people, just like, in the weeks leading up to my crash, and saying, man, I feel the best I have in years. And what I came to find out afterwards, through learning about burnout and everything, is the reason why I felt the best that I had in years right before my burnout is because I was high on adrenaline. And adrenaline is a short-term drug. It's a short-term boost that you need, but it's not meant to sustain you. And so what happens with burnout is that you need your serotonin is what you draw on daily. And if you use up your serotonin, then you start drawing on adrenaline. And then once your adrenaline's gone, that's when you crash. And that's exactly what happened. I was, burned up all my serotonin, just with the daily grind, was running on adrenaline. And then that adrenaline runs out and it was just boom, crash, and it's over.
I want to ask you what that crash looked like. If you kind of describe the symptoms of that, how does one know when they crash? I have a feeling like when you've crashed, right? There's not like warning signs that you're like, I wonder if I crashed or not. Like you kind of know. But I also want to ask in there too, and then you can go in any direction you want with this. How did you know you ran out of serotonin? Like when you were describing that, I was like, wouldn't it be cool if as humans we had like gauges that vehicles have where you can check, put the little dipstick in and go, oh, serotonin's getting low, or man, I'm just running on straight adrenaline. But like, how did you know that? And how could a pastor who's listening to this be aware of that and be self-aware, like, ooh, I should lean in right now because I might not actually be as good as I feel I am in the moment.
Yeah, well, I'll try to answer that the best I can, but just disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, so
all right, I won't hold you to it then.
I might not get all the science right. I can only speak from my experience and what I've read. But the serotonin thing, it's like a slow draw. So if you're running at a high, high speed, high capacity for a sustained amount of time, you're just going to continue to make withdrawals on that serotonin, and you're going to withdraw more than you've deposited. And so your serotonin from what I understand, replaces itself every day. And so if you're constantly withdrawing more than what is replaced on a daily basis, eventually you're going to run out. And so the best thing I can say is just to take a daily, weekly audit of yourself and your energy and your mood and your workload and everything and what you're doing. I like to think of it as this car analogy of heard it somewhere of RPMs, checking your RPMs. R is relationships. P is totally blanking on now, so I shouldn't even say this. Maybe we'll edit this out.
Yeah, we can do that. No worries. We'll edit it out.
So now I'm totally blanking on what those other things are. So
it'll come back to you.
Yeah, it'll come back to me later in the podcast, but just checking, your energy and making sure that you're healthy. And for me, the good indication is if you go from like you're just like feeling like euphoric, which is weird because like we like to think like it's like that, camp experience where I'm just like, wow, man, I just feel like I'm on cloud nine. And if you're feeling that like for maybe several weeks and there's not maybe a good reason why. I mean, like maybe things are great, but it's not like you didn't just have like this, Easter didn't just happen. You didn't just have this great, experience. It's just kind of like that's your overall general feeling. It might be might be cause for you to go, oh, maybe I'm running on adrenaline and I need to stop and slow down right now.
So to my question about what did that crash look like for you, walk us through that. Like, what does it look like when a pastor who's been depleted of that serotonin and is running on pure adrenaline finally runs out of adrenaline? What did that day look like for you?
Yeah, I remember very distinctly the moment that it happened. I'm sure there was things leading up to it and everything, but I just remember sitting at the table eating my raisin bran one morning, and we were in the midst of, again, 2 years in a church plant. We had just moved into a permanent space. We were doing a lot of remodeling to get our children's space ready for our fall kickoff. And there was still a long list of things to do, and we were less than a week away. And I remember my wife, who led our children's ministry, was just kind of peppering me with questions. I mean, not nagging, but just doing like, well, what about this? What about that? When's this going to be done? And I just remember just like feeling so overwhelmed. Like I'm just like, I don't know, and I just can't take another question right now. And I'm like, I just like put my head down on the table and I'm just started to sob. And I'm like, I can't take anymore. I can't take any more questions. And that just continued as I went on throughout that week. It was just like anytime I was faced with like a simple decision, even about like, should I have Raisin Bran or should I have Rice Krispies for breakfast? It was like I felt overwhelmed, like I couldn't even make that decision. Everything was just like seemed like it was too much. And you have this sort of, I guess, stereotype of someone who's like, curled up in the fetal position, you know, on the floor crying. And that was almost literally me. Like I just felt like I cannot cope with life. And I don't know if that's what it looks like for everybody, because I think there's a lot of leaders that are dealing with burnout, that are on the verge of burnout, that just keep powering through.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know how to stop. But for me, like, I guess maybe fortunately, the best thing that ever happened to me is I felt like I had no choice. I had to stop. And so I had been going to a counselor, regularly, seeing a counselor regularly. And so in the midst of all this, she said, I want you to go see a medical professional. She's like, I can deal with, the depression, the anxiety and everything, but I want you to go see a medical professional, make sure there's nothing else going on. And so when I went to this medical professional, this doctor, she diagnosed me with burnout. And she was like, she had me do this questionnaire and interviewed me, all these things. And she said, this is a classic case of burnout, and you need to take a year off of ministry or you're going to kill yourself.
Mm.
And I'm just like, who can take a year off of ministry, right? I can't even take a Sunday off of ministry. And I just felt trapped, and she's like, seriously, if you don't, you're gonna end up killing yourself. And it was then that I started to realize that, like, I was seriously at risk, because I started realizing that there were 6 different times that I counted that somebody else who was in the car with me pointed out that I went through either a red light or a stop sign while I was driving. It was just like, you just like tunnel vision, just like in lost in my own thoughts, not paying attention to anything that's going on around me. And I'm like, okay, this actually, my life really is at stake here. It's like I could get in a car accident because I'm not fully present, not fully aware. Certainly, heart attack, high blood pressure, that kind of stuff. But honestly, Jon, the thing that I became most aware of is like, I was like, I can see now how pastors have moral failures, right? Like we can look at pastors and pastors that we've respected and go, how could you do that? How could you let that happen? And all of a sudden I was like, man, I see how that happens, because right now that looks like a desirable way out. That is could be the way out of this mess. And because you feel trapped. And so, but that was for me, that was the real warning light, that it was like I wanted to take myself out of ministry before I was taken out of ministry, if that makes sense.
Wow. First of all, I want to just say thank you for being transparent and sharing that. And 2 things I want to bring up. One, I want to interject just a small part of my story. I know I'm interviewing you, but the theme or the point that I want to make is that I think it does look different for different people. There's maybe not just a one size fits all burnout and it only looks like this. Because Jeff, was that leader you mentioned a minute ago, that put my head down and pushed harder and faster. Because I just told this story literally today to another pastor in a coaching conversation, but it was the year 2015. I had just a tremendous amount of loss. There was a season of just a number of things in my family, on our church staff. We had some people moving away, not because of any conflict, but just God moving them into new seasons of leadership in other places that took them out of our church, and painful. And it was a loss. And my response to all of it, as I felt that burden just sinking down more and more, was just work harder, move faster, push, and ignore it, ignore the pain as much as possible. And the breaking point for me came in a staff meeting I was having one day, where I was just venting some frustration about whatever. I don't even remember. But what I do remember is one of my staff members said, "Jon, I don't think you should be making any big decisions right now because you have not processed the grief from all the loss that you've had in recent months. And when she said the word grief, it almost brought me to instant tears. Like I almost broke down weeping right there when I heard the word grief. And I thought, that is a light on the dashboard of my soul. Like the check engine light is on. Like, what is that? Why did that word trigger me so much? And it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that you are grieving and you're running from grief and you haven't processed it, and it's just getting heavier and heavier. So I was probably well on my way to some kind of a crash. And thankfully, I did get into some counseling with a grief counselor and I'm sitting here just unpacking how big of a failure I felt like. It's interesting how in pastoral ministry, we internalize so much of that. We feel like we're the problem. I caused this. I failed. And then you've used the word trapped a couple times as well. And I think then we feel that as well, because it's like, what else am I going to do? I've got people depending on me. There's that whole calling from God thing. That's kind of heavy. And how do I get out of this, or how do I alleviate some of the pain that I'm in right now? So the other thing I wanted to highlight from your story too, and just that our audience will hear, is it's not just a single-sided approach. Like, because I heard you saying you were you were dealing with a counselor, maybe getting help on the mental, spiritual side of things. But then this counselor says, I want you to go see a medical doctor. There's a physical component to this. And even that can be broken down into our nutrition, the diet we're eating, the supplements we are or not getting, the physical exercise we are or are not getting. And so it's not just to do this one thing. It certainly is not what we've been telling pastors for far too long, and that's just read your Bible. Like, how helpful would that have been, Jeff, in that season, if I would have sat down with you and said, well, Jeff, just read your Bible and pray more, man. Like this, and I maybe, point out some demonic activity behind it, and we anoint you with oil and lay hands. And I'm not mocking that thing, but if that's all I gave you, how helpful would that have been in that season? If I say, hey, just, walk closer to Jesus in this season, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I got plenty of that advice, and it wasn't helpful at all. And I mean, there is an aspect of that. Certainly there's a spiritual dimension to this all.
Sure.
We're holistic human beings, but that is just an aspect. And so, as a pastor, when somebody says that to you, like for me, it just made me feel even more and more like a failure and a loser. It's like, well, here I'm a pastor and I'm not even like spiritual enough, or I'm not even hearing from God, or it's like, so it was really unhelpful for me to hear that from people. But fortunately, I was like, I think, I'd been in counseling for long enough, to be able to understand that, hey, those are well-meaning people that say those things, but they just don't understand the fullness of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, advance the story. So here you are, you've hit the wall. Things are messy. You've got advice from a medical professional saying, take a year off of ministry, or you're going to, it's going to be to your detriment if you don't. Like, what did you do next? How did you move forward?
Yeah. So I went to my church board, my elders, and, shared with them this, and they said, well, we want you to take some time off. So I think initially they gave me 2 weeks, and I'm like, well, that's not going to cut it. So then it was basically just like a week at a time. And if every week they'd be like, hey, are you coming back? And I'd be like, I don't think so. Not yet. And so eventually, after I think it was 9 weeks, I felt like, all right, I gotta get back. Again, 2 years into a church plant, I knew they were struggling without me. And so I knew I had to get back, but at the same time, I knew I wasn't ready to get back. I knew I was better, but I was not at my best. And so even though I was going back, I was beginning to make an exit strategy that it's time to do something else. I need a break from this.
And as you're making that exit strategy, like, was there, I mean, in addition to just all the stuff you're dealing with, was there other, I think what I want to ask is, was there other mindset issues around that of like, man, I'm failing God, I'm being disobedient to my calling if I go do something else? Did you know what that something else was? Like, walk us through that, because I think that's where a lot of pastors feel so stuck. It's like, is God okay if I go do something else? What would I even go do? I mean, that's a lot of what we do with our Entre Pastors platform, is we have these conversations around this area with pastors. But what did that look like for you? What was kind of the internal dialogue around all of that?
Yeah. So, there was a lot of expectation surrounding this church plant. The second time around, second church plant was, by all accounts, was wildly successful in a small town, small market, but it was, became, we were looked at by a lot of people as really, being successful. And so I was going into, quote, a bigger market to plant a church. And there was a lot of expectation, I think, that this new church was going to blow up, was going to grow rapidly and everything. And, probably nobody had that expectation more than myself. But we had a lot of support to do this. And, over the years had built a good network of supporters and people that believed in me and believed in the vision of what God was calling us to do. And then on top of that, I had become a church planting director for a 5-state region. So, I get to this point where, I'm crashing and I'm like, I've got all of these expectations upon me from people that this church plant is going to be wildly successful. They've poured, their money into it. People have moved to help us plant this church. I'm coaching other church planters, and my own church plant might not even make it. And so there was just this overwhelming feeling of like, man, I am such a failure. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like this imposter syndrome, like, like how can I coach another church planter when I don't even know what I'm doing myself? So there was that aspect to it. And then, as you alluded to, there's this aspect of feeling trapped. Like, I've been a pastor for 18 years. What else am I going to do? Right? We say a lot of times that pastors aren't paid well enough, but might still be paid better than if we were to go work at McDonald's or something, hopefully, and it's like we feel like we have no other skills or experience that translates to the marketplace that would be helpful to others, or marketable skills, I guess, that people would want to pay us for.
Yeah. Well, so what did you kind of land on as you started moving away from the church world? Like what was the thing? I know what it is now. I know what you've built, but tell us that story of how you kind of transitioned into a new season of ministry that looks a little bit more like a business thing than a, church thing, but you're still serving the church. So tell us about it.
Yeah. So, I started applying for jobs, different places, and, just nothing felt good in my soul, and also there was just a lot of, it's hard to convince people that, hey, like, I have skills that I think would be helpful to you. But I did have some opportunities, and I just felt like I did not want to give my time and effort to like fundraising for a university, or, was like one opportunity I had. And so I remember Googling like one time, like, hey, what are, the best side hustles, I think it was, or something. And, came up with this article with 50 best side hustles. And, I'm not going to, create an Etsy business or something, or there's like all these other things. But one of them was start your own bookkeeping business. And that one I was like, hey, wait a second. Like, prior to, 18 years prior to becoming a church planter, I had worked as a corporate accountant for a few years. And so I had that accounting background. I had seen the frustration that churches deal with around finances, especially church plants. Had my own frustration. Had the entrepreneurial background of being a church planter. So, I felt like confident I could start my own business. And so I just started asking, other people, that I respected in the church world, like, hey, do you see this as a need? Like, if this were available, would you think that it would meet a need that you see for other churches and pastors? And, I got a resounding yes from everybody I talked to. And so Church Plant Solutions was born as a bookkeeping service for churches, and specializing in church plants, but really we deal with churches of all shapes and sizes, from pre-launch to now have serve our largest church is 6 campuses, $8 million budget. So we have the gamut, um, but it was like starting that. I even initially was just thinking, well, this will be maybe something that I can do on the side to have supplemental income. But as I started it, I'm like, you know what? I think I actually could make a go at this full time.
Hmm.
And so I ended up resigning from my church and going full time into starting Church Plant Solutions to serve churches in another way.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And again, if this audience is not aware, I'll just share a little bit of my credentials in that. I'm very biased in this, as I run a platform called Anti-Pastors, where we help pastors do exactly that. Not necessarily, doesn't always mean leaving their, church work necessarily, but it doesn't not mean that either. But the bottom line is helping them get out into the marketplace and launch a business that in many cases will help them do much better financially than what they were able to do in the church world, and also opens the door to some cool ministry opportunities. One of the things, though, the reason I share that, if Anti-Pastors could have intersected with you and your story in that season, I would have really pushed back hard on this idea of what could I possibly offer to the marketplace. And it's very common, Jeff, what you said, a lot of pastors struggle with that. I've just been a pastor for all these years, and we devalue it. And I think so much about ministry teaches us as pastors, we're conditioned to devalue the work that we do. It's not held with high honor much of the time. There's a lot of expectations. It's a very thankless job in many ways. And I think so often pastors are just kind of beat down and taught to not value the work that they do. And so with Anti-Pastors, we often help pastors recognize so many of the skills that you have honed over the years in pastoral ministry are very valuable and very much needed in the marketplace, and can be used in the marketplace to serve others and to create a source of income. So you've done that. You launched a business that's serving churches. You're doing bookkeeping, leaning on a skill that you had, before church. And I'm assuming even during some of your pastoral work, you were, if that was part of your skill set, you were probably using that at least to some degree, whether you saw it as a major thing or not. There's part of your story, Jeff, I just want to hit on briefly, because there's something in that story I want our audience to hear. In all of that transition, you made a geographical move. And this isn't, I don't want you to share this as prescriptive for everybody out there, but in your case, it literally was a very helpful thing. And specifically, I would love for you to share that part of the story where a friend, mentor, someone really challenged you with a question about, why are you not doing this? So tell that story a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So important context, the church plants, all 3 church plants that I had were in 18 years of ministry, were in Minnesota and North Dakota. So in very cold climates. And I lived my entire life in the frozen tundra of the upper Midwest. And over the years, I really began to see how that affected me really, really badly, with seasonal affective depression disorder. And, which throughout other seasons will not just be in the winter. But definitely there's a high seasonal component to it. And so along with that, I've been on meds for depression for upwards of 12 years. And so, kind of after this burnout, and just after I'd gone back to my church, I was down in Florida at a conference, and I remember walking on the beach with one of my best friends. And I have a mother-in-law that lives in Florida, and so we would come down and visit often. And really, it was part of my mental health plan. As I would say, every winter I go to Florida for 2 weeks. I have to do it. It's not optional. It's not a matter of whether we can afford it or not. It's in the calendar every year. And I needed that. And so, so we're down there in January, and I'm just telling them, man, because I just gone through all this burnout. It's winter, it's the dead of winter again in North Dakota. And I'm just like, I wish that I could move here. Like, I just Florida because I just feel so alive. Like I just feel like this burden is lifted off of my soul when I'm in Florida. As I just wish we could move here. And he just looked at me and he said, "Well, why can't you?" And it was such a simple question that completely changed the trajectory of my life because I started out, well, why can't I? Because just as we talked about, like I was like, I felt trapped. I was like, well, I can't do that because I can't leave my church because of this. I can't make a move because of that. And him just asking that question, well, why can't I? I started to ask that of myself. Well, why can't I? Why can't I move? So I went back to my wife and I said, I think it's time. I think it's time for us to make a move. And it took a year and a half of us planning and preparing to make that move, but that was his question that really set us in that direction to make that move. And I think there might be something that one of our listeners is dealing with where it's the same thing, where it's like, why can't you do that? Who told you you couldn't do that? And
Yeah.
it might be a move, it might be a new opportunity, it might be who knows what, but we're limited maybe by the constraints that we put upon ourselves that others put upon us that
Yeah.
aren't really there.
That's what I really wanted people to hear. It's not prescriptive that everybody moves to Florida, because that may not be the answer. What worked for you may be, prison to someone else. But the thing is, why can't you do that? And what I would say, if I were coaching someone in that situation, it's if there's a desire, if there's a passion in your heart that's there, it really good chance that God's voice is in that to some degree. Again, it doesn't mean we always just pick up and move anytime we find something new and shiny, but if there's something in your heart that is life-giving and it's an energizing thing, could very much be that God wants you to move exactly in that direction and lean into whatever that is and stop listening to all those limitations, those limiting thoughts and beliefs that would say, well, you can't do that. Other people can do that, but you can't. And so I'm very appreciative of that part of your story. It was in that season that I got to be walking beside you and not going to lie, a little bit jealous watching you make that transition from because I live in South Dakota where it's equally frozen and cold. And I'm touched by that same thing a little bit each winter where it's a real thing. For people in the South that are listening to this, you have no idea. Come out here and just join us December through March. And if you are still alive, we can have a conversation at the end of that about what that thing called winter is like. It's a real thing. So some people love it, Jeff. Some people tell me they love and appreciate everything about the cold and snow.
They're lying.
Yeah, I agree. They're trying to convince themselves they like it.
That's what I tried to do for so many years is I tried to convince myself and just I got tired trying to lie to myself every winter. I was like, all right, I can't do this anymore. But something that I think is significant for the whole, mental health story for me, and again, it might not be Florida for you. I'm not trying to recruit anybody to Florida, but since we moved to Florida, I've been off of depression meds now for over 3 years.
Awesome.
Which is amazing. And so, just a change of environment, whether it's, geographically or maybe it's just a new opportunity, can make a world of difference. And don't ever underestimate that.
Yeah, I'm grateful you shared that. I do want to end by talking a little bit about your church plant solutions, specifically a little bit more of some of the services you provide the church in that realm. But one last thing before we go to that, one more detail I just want to share as we kind of are unpacking a little bit of your story. You are back in ministry. You're back in vocational church ministry. And if you want to give us kind of the 30,000-foot view of that story, feel free to share that part of it.
Yeah, we moved to Florida and it was creating church plant solutions that allow me to do that because it's a, remote business. We do it for serve churches all over the country, so I could live anywhere. So we moved to Florida and just started attending church and, just made a connection with the pastor and we just started getting together for coffee regularly. And, we'd have these conversations. What I really miss the most about ministry is being part of a team. I'm a team guy and I really, really miss being a part of that team. And, God just started stirring in my heart again about, being back in vocational ministry and, So I remember just, saying to him one time we were having coffee, probably, about 6 months into our relationship, saying, I don't know if there ever be a place for me here, but I would, feel like maybe God wants to open up a door for me to get back into pastoral ministry. So I just want to put that out there. And he said, well, actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk with you about today.
Wow.
And so the church was in the process of doing a massive reorganization and creating a new position. And he felt like I would be a good fit for that new position they were creating. And long story short, I stepped into that. So was out of full-time ministry for about 2 years and 9 months, I think, before stepping back in. And so now I serve full-time as an executive pastor at a church here in Florida, and also my company, Church Plant Solutions, serves churches all over the country.
Love that, man. And I just so much respect the journey that you've been on and recognize you're still on it. It's not over yet, but it's cool to see you serving where you are today, and just the progress that you've made from when I met you a few years ago and where you were then. So real quick on the Church Plant Solution side of things, I know you mentioned you offer bookkeeping for churches. I can't remember if you said this in this conversation or if this is just what I know from being connected to you, that you're also getting ready to roll out service as well, doing pastoral taxes. Is it okay if I say that out loud on the podcast? Are you at that point of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Just last week's solidified that. So we got a guy coming on our team, was a pastor, church planter for 12 years, and but he's also a tax guy and an enrolled agent, which is like just below a CPA. So he's coming on our team and to help serve a huge need, which is for doing income taxes for pastors. And I know as a pastor myself, I always struggle with that every year, like trying to find somebody to do taxes. When you find somebody, it's a great opportunity. So we're really excited to bring Chris on our team to be able to do that. And so excited again, like, he's like myself. He's a pastor, church planter first. So, it's what I love about what we do is we're pastors first. We have a heart for pastors, a heart for the church. But we also have some financial knowledge that we are able to help churches with. And I think it's a great fit.
I love that. I don't know exactly when this podcast will air. My guess is it's going to be sometime in the first quarter of 2024. So, it'll be that season where pastors are thinking about, doing their tax return. And I would just encourage anybody, if that's a need, whether it's at the church corporate level for, bookkeeping for your church, or even personal level, someone that gets, the pastor's finances and all the nuances of that and needs help with that they would reach out and connect with you. Jeff, what's the best way for people to find you online if they want to reach out and connect?
Yeah, you can find us at churchplantsolutions.com. And right there on our website, you can schedule a 30-minute, no pressure consultation where we can just talk about, what your needs are and see if there's a way that we can help meet your needs, help kind of relieve some of maybe the struggle, the pressure, the problem that you're having. You can find us on social as well, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, that sort of stuff. Or you can email me directly, jeff@churchplantsolutions.com, and I would love to have a conversation with you.
Awesome. Here's the last question I'm going to ask you, Jeff, and I'll start by saying thank you again for just coming on and sharing your story. I know there's parts of your story that'll resonate with many in this audience, but if you had just a quick moment to leave a word of encouragement to a pastor that is maybe on a similar path that you were on, maybe they're right in the heart of what you were going through a few years ago, what would you say to encourage them? What's your best advice? Take it away, take it any direction you want, but how would you encourage that pastor today?
I think the best advice that I could give is that the best gift that you can give to yourself, to your family, or to your church is a healthy you. So to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And so you need to take care of yourself. God didn't call you into ministry to sacrifice you on his altar. He can't use you if you're dead. He can't
Yeah.
use you if you're incapacitated, if you're, not, I mean, he can use anybody, not at your best, absolutely, but he wants you to be healthy. Um, so so I would just urge you to not just put your head down and try to power through. And what I hear all the time from pastors is it's just a season. Well, a season has a beginning and an end. So if you're saying it's just a season all the time, it's not a season. It's a habit and it's a problem.
A
And
lifestyle.
so yeah, it's a lifestyle. So you need to make change. So you need to work, rest and exercise and all those things, soul care, all those things into your schedule on a daily basis, but also on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis as well, to take care of yourself for the long haul.
Yeah, that's good. And one last thought, Jeff. I know I said it was my last question. Typical pastor. I say we're about done, and then we're not done. But
Yeah.
a few years ago, when you're in the heart of that, just going in the darkest part of that storm, I'm sure you probably had no way of looking ahead and seeing a day in the very, honestly, the very near future in the grand scheme of things where you're healthier, your outlook is healthier, your family's healthier, you're in a better place, financially you're better, you're still in ministry. And I think I've got to believe that's a scary place. I've partially been in that place of like, I can't see a better future from where I am right now. It feels like my best days are behind me. But in reality, that hasn't been the case. Like you're experiencing better days today than what you were in those darkest moments. So it's maybe just, I don't know if there's a question there, just an observation, but anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, what you're saying there is, I don't know if this is where you're going, but what it makes me think of is that's really my advocacy for prescription drugs times when it comes to depression, anxiety, those sort of things. Is again, going back to the serotonin, sometimes you need those meds to get your serotonin levels up so that you can begin to see things more clearly, right? So that you can get that perspective. And sometimes you can't get that until your body has that. And so that's my suggestion. Again, like if you're that person that's just like you're slogging through and you've been thinking, man, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm stressed, maybe you need to go see a doctor, a counselor and or a doctor, and begin to get some help for yourself.
Yeah. Well, this is so good, Jeff. Thank you again for your time, your transparency, and we wish you all the best as you continue to serve God and serve the church in the various capacities that you are. So all the best, my friend.
Thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate it. It was a blast being here.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.